I woke up to a light touch on my shoulder. My mind, still clouded by sleep, struggled to register what was happening when I opened my eyes. I saw Emily standing next to my bed. Her face was pale, her eyes wet with tears, and her fingers trembled slightly. "Charlie," she whispered, her voice so soft it barely reached me. "We need to talk." My heart pounded in my chest. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way she said them, full of something heavy, something unresolved. She looked at me like she was about to confess something unbearable. The silence of the house, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep and make sense of the moment. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked. But my voice was barely more than a croak. My head spun with confusion and a chill crept down my spine. What could possibly be so urgent, so important that she'd wake me like this? Her eyes didn't meet mine, and for a moment I wondered if she'd even heard my question. She took a deep breath and the tension in the room thickened. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be a simple conversation. A few months ago, I never would have imagined that I'd be living with Emily. Our relationship was distant, almost non-existent. After my father passed away, she was more of a figure in the background, someone I only saw on holidays or at family gatherings. When Dad died, we drifted apart even further, each of us absorbed in our own grief. But life has a funny way of pulling people together when you least expect it. After I graduated, I couldn't find a job and my savings dried up faster than I thought they would. I had no choice but to reach out to her. "Can I stay with you for a while?" I remember asking, my voice full of hesitation. It wasn't an easy call to make, but I had no other options. Surprisingly, she agreed without much thought. I didn't know if she was being kind or just didn't want to say no. Either way, I packed my things and moved into her house. It felt odd at first. The house was so quiet, tucked away on the edge of town, surrounded by trees that seemed to swallow up all the noise from the outside world. It was the kind of place where time felt slower, where the days blurred together. I tried to make myself as invisible as possible, spending most of my time job hunting her out of the house. But even in the silence, there was something unsettling about being there. We would have dinner together, making small talk about mundane things like the weather or what I was doing to find work. Emily was always polite, but there was a distance between us that I couldn't quite explain. It was like she wasn't entirely present even when she was sitting right across from me. And yet, as the days passed, I began to notice small changes. I caught her looking at me a little too long, sometimes her gaze lingering in a way that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't say why. I brushed it off as my imagination, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the tension in the air was undeniable. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, she went out to the balcony to water the plants. I stayed inside, cleaning up, trying to shake the feeling that had been gnawing at me. When I turned around to bring the dishes back to the kitchen, our eyes met through the glass door. It was only for a moment, but it felt like time stopped. I don't know what came over me. Before I even realized what I was doing, I found myself walking toward her. She stood still, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. When I reached her, something unspoken passed between us without thinking. I leaned in and our lips met. The kiss was brief, almost accidental, but it shook me to my core. I stepped back quickly, heart pounding my mind, racing what had I just done. I glanced at her, expecting her to be angry, to say something, anything, but she didn't. She just stood there, silent, as if she was as shocked as I was. We didn't talk about it. After that, we didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any words we could have exchanged. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew that nothing between us would ever be the same. After that night, things changed, though neither of us spoke about it. We lived in the same house, but there was now an invisible line between us that hadn't been there before. It was as if both of us were pretending nothing happened, clinging to the routine of our days, but underneath it all something was brewing. I couldn't shake the image of that kiss from my mind. It was brief, barely more than a touch, but it lingered in my thoughts like an echo. I couldn't silence. Every time I looked at Emily, I could see she was struggling with it too. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes not quite meeting mine, and the easy conversations we once had over dinner became stilted, heavy with unspoken words. But the tension wasn't just in our conversations. It was everywhere, in every shared moment, every glance, every time our hands brushed when passing each other in the hallway. These small touches, which once seemed so innocent, now felt loaded with meaning. I could see her flinch sometimes when we accidentally touched, and I'd pull back just as quickly. The space between us charged. One night, as I stood in the kitchen making tea, Emily came in quietly. We hadn't spoken much all day, and the silence between us had grown into something tangible, like a presence in the room. She was standing just a few feet away, her back to me, as she stared out the window into the dark. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she was thinking about the same thing. I was wondering if she regretted it. "Emily," I finally said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded strange to me, too loud in the quiet room. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders tense about what happened the other night. "We don't need to talk about it," she interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "It was a mistake. Let's just leave it at that. A mistake." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I wanted to agree, to tell her that I felt the same, that it had been nothing more than a brief lapse in judgment. But I couldn't, because it didn't feel like a mistake, not to me. "I don't know if it was," I said, my words coming out slower than I intended. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to say, but it felt like I had to say something, anything to break through the silence. This time she turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "What are you saying, Charlie?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if she was afraid of the answer. I took a breath, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. "I don't know. I admitted, shaking my head. I can't stop thinking about it there. It was out in the open now. The thing we had both been avoiding. The room felt smaller, the air heavier as she looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't define. I thought she would walk away, leave me standing there like a fool for even bringing up, but she didn't. Instead, she took a step closer. For a moment, neither of us moved. It was like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that if we took even one more step, we would fall and there would be no going back. And yet neither of us could seem to stop ourselves. Before I could think about what I was doing, my hand reached out, brushing against hers. This time she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her breathing shallow. When she finally looked back up at me, her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before. Fear, maybe it was something else, something we both had been trying to ignore. "I don't know what we're doing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is wrong." I know, I said, my voice just as quiet, but neither of us moved. And then, just like before we kissed, it wasn't sudden or hurried like the last time. This one was slower, almost tentative, like we were both testing the waters. Unsure if we were about to drown. It was different, but just as overwhelming. When we finally broke apart, the weight of what we had just done settled between us, even heavier than before. I stepped back, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to say, and judging by the look on her face, neither did she. The days after that second kiss passed in a blur. We both acted like nothing had changed, but it was impossible to ignore the shift between us. Every moment we were in the same room, the tension was palpable. I felt it in every word, every glance, every time our eyes met and we quickly looked away. There was something unsaid, something hanging between us, but neither of us dared to address it. Emily seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn. She spent more time outside, working in the garden, as if losing herself in the plants would somehow ease whatever was going on inside her. I too found ways to avoid being alone with her for too long. It was as though we had an unspoken agreement to not acknowledge what had happened, even though it was the only thing on my mind. Then, one evening, everything came to a head. It started like any other evening. Emily had been out all day and I'd been at home sending out job applications, trying to distract myself. By the time she returned, the sun was setting, casting a golden light through the windows. I was sitting on the couch when she walked in. She looked tired, her hair a little messy from the wind, her expression distant. "Hey," I said, unsure of what else to say. "Hey," she replied softly, dropping her bag by the door. She didn't look at me. As she moved into the kitchen, I heard the familiar sounds of her setting down the kettle, opening cabinets. There was something comforting in the routine, but that comfort felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. I stood up, pacing the living room, not sure what I was doing. Not sure if I should leave the house and give her space, but something stopped me from walking out the door. Instead, I found myself following her into the kitchen. She was leaning against the counter, staring blankly at the kettle as it boiled. The room felt too small for both of us, like the walls were closing in. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. She was the first to break the silence. "I can't keep doing this, Charlie," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She didn't turn to face me, just kept staring ahead, as if looking at me would make it all too real. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "This," she said, gesturing vaguely between us. "I don't know what we're doing, but it can't go on like this. It's not right." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "I know," I admitted, stepping closer but keeping my distance, "but I can't stop thinking about you, about us." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time in days, she looked directly at me. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and confusion. "I think about it too," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that doesn't mean it's right. We can't just pretend like this is normal." "I don't know if it is," I said, my voice faltering, "but it's real. I know you feel it too." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned off the kettle and placed both hands on the counter, gripping it as if she needed something solid to hold on to. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know what I feel anymore," she finally said, her voice breaking slightly. "Everything's so confusing." I took a hesitant step closer, the space between us shrinking. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I did not yet. "I don't want to make things harder for you, Emily," I said quietly, "but I can't pretend like nothing's happening. We can't just ignore it." Her eyes met mine again, and I could see the internal battle she was fighting. Part of her wanted to keep pushing me away to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But the other part, the part that had kissed me back twice, couldn't quite let go. "This isn't going to end well," she said, shaking her head. We both know that. I swallowed hard, knowing she was right. There was no future here, no clear path forward. But that didn't stop me from wanting her, from feeling drawn to her, in a way I couldn't explain. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. I don't want to lose whatever this is." For a moment it looked like she might cry, but she blinked quickly, pushing the tears back. "I don't either," she whispered, and that was the most honest thing she'd said. In weeks I took one more step forward, and this time I did reach out. My hand brushed against hers, and I felt her tense for a moment before she relaxed into the touch, her fingers lightly intertwined with mine, and for a second it felt like we might be able to hold on to this fragile thing between us. But deep down we both knew that wasn't possible. "I wish things were different," I said, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her grip on my hand tightening slightly. "Me too." We stood there in silence, hand in hand, knowing that we were on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. Neither of us wanted to take the next step. But neither of us was ready to walk away either. The room felt too quiet, like it was waiting for one of us to make a move. But all I could do was hold her hand and hope that somehow we could find a way out of this without destroying everything. The days after our conversation in the kitchen were like walking on a tightrope. Every word, every glance felt loaded, as if at any moment everything might come crashing down. We both went about our routines. Emily with her garden, I with my endless job applications. But the unspoken weight between us lingered like a shadow. We couldn't escape. Every moment in that house felt tense, as if we were just waiting for something to snap. One evening I sat on the porch staring out at the trees that surrounded the house. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. It was peaceful, but that peace felt fragile, like it could break at any moment. Emily joined me a few minutes later, sitting silently next to me on the bench. We didn't say anything for a while, just sat there side by side watching the world slowly turn to dusk. I could feel her presence beside me so close, and yet it felt like there was a chasm between us. I glanced over at her, noticing the way the fading light caught in her hair, the way she was lost in thought, her brow furrowed. I didn't know what was going through her mind, but I had a feeling it wasn't much different from what was going through mine. Finally, I broke the silence. I've been thinking about what you said. She didn't look at me but nodded slightly, as if she had expected this conversation. I know this isn't right. I continued, my voice quieter now, as confessing something I wasn't supposed to admit, but I can't stop. I don't know how. Her hands were folded in her lap, and I saw her fingers tighten slightly. Neither can I, she whispered so softly I almost didn't hear her there. It was again that same unspoken truth that had been hanging between us for weeks. We both knew it couldn't end well, but neither of us could stop. It was like being caught in a current, pulled towards something we didn't want to face but couldn't avoid for a moment. We sat there in silence, the tension between us growing thicker with every passing second. And then, without thinking, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she turned to me, her eyes filled with that same mixture of sadness and confusion that I'd seen before. I don't know what we're doing, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know where this is going, I don't either. I admitted, but I know I don't want it to stop. There was a long pause, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The world around us seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of us sitting on that porch, caught between what we knew was right and what we wanted. And then it happened again. I leaned in slowly, almost cautiously, as if I was giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. Instead, she met me halfway, and our lips brushed together softly, tentatively at first, but then with more certainty. This kiss was different from the others. It wasn't rushed or panicked. It was deliberate, slow, filled with all the emotions we hadn't been able to say out loud for a brief moment. Everything else disappeared. The guilt, the confusion, the uncertainty. They all melted away, leaving only the connection between us. It was as if for the first time we weren't fighting it. We weren't pretending it wasn't happening. We were just there in that moment with nothing else standing in the way. But as soon as it ended, the reality of what we were doing came crashing back down. Emily pulled away first, her breath shaky, her hands still resting in mine, but with less conviction. Now this can't keep happening, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. We're only making things worse. I didn't know what to say because I knew she was right, but at the same time I didn't want to stop. I couldn't. I know, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion, but I don't know how to stop. She let go of my hand and stood up, stepping away from me. We need to figure it out. Charlie, before we go too far. I watched her walk back inside the door, closing softly behind her, leaving me alone on the porch with my thoughts. The sun had set completely now, and the darkness felt heavier than usual, pressing down on me with a suffocating weight. I knew we were on the edge of something dangerous, something that couldn't end well. But even as I sat there staring out into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. We had crossed a line, and no matter how much we tried to ignore it, there was no going back. The silence between us was unbearable. After that kiss on the porch, everything changed again. We tried to go back to our routines, but the weight of what had happened followed us around like a shadow. Every time we passed each other in the hallway or shared a meal at the table, it felt like we were both tiptoeing around the inevitable. I could feel the tension in the air growing, but neither of us dared to bring it up. One evening, after what felt like an eternity of avoiding each other, I found myself pacing in my room, restless and anxious. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. I heard the soft creak of the floorboards in the hallway, and instinctively I knew it was Emily. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. She was standing just outside, as if she had been debating whether or not to knock. Our eyes met, and for a long moment we just stood there, frozen in place. "Can I come in?" she finally asked, her voice soft, almost fragile. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She walked into the room slowly, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I closed the door behind her, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should have in the stillness of the room. We didn't say anything for a while. She stood near the window, looking out into the darkness, while I leaned against the edge of the bed, unsure of what to do or say. The air between us was thick with all the things. We weren't saying all the emotions we were both too scared to acknowledge. "I don't know how to stop this," she whispered, still not looking at me. I thought we could just pretend it didn't happen, but I can't, and it's tearing me apart. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew exactly how she felt because I'd been feeling the same thing. The guilt, the confusion, the constant push and pull between what we knew was right and what we wanted. It was overwhelming. I don't want to stop, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. I've tried, but I can't. She finally turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw the same struggle I'd been carrying inside me for weeks. We both knew this couldn't continue, that we were walking down a path that had no good ending, but even knowing that I couldn't bring myself to say the words that would make it stop. Charlie, she started, but her voice broke and she shook her head, unable to finish. I crossed the room to her, not thinking, just moving. When I reached her, I gently took her hands in mine. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at our hands, her breath coming in shaky, uneven bursts. It felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the drop, knowing we were about to fall without another word. I leaned in, closing the distance between us. This kiss wasn't like the others. It was slower, more hesitant, filled with the weight of everything we were both feeling, but couldn't say it was as if we were both searching for something in that moment. Answers, comfort, maybe even a way to make sense of the mess we'd created. When we pulled away, the room felt colder. Emptier. Emily stepped back, her face a mixture of sadness and resignation. She let out a shaky breath, wiping at her eyes quickly before turning away from me. This has to stop, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We're just hurting ourselves. We're hurting each other. I wanted to argue, to tell her that we could find a way to make it work, that we could somehow untangle the knot we'd tied ourselves into. But the truth was, I knew she was right. We couldn't keep going like this. Every step we took together was another step closer to something that would break us both. I know, I said quietly, my chest tight with emotions. I couldn't fully express, but I don't know how to let go. Neither did she. That much was clear. We were both stuck, caught in this impossible situation with no easy way out. For a long moment we stood there in silence, the weight of our shared decision pressing down on us. I wanted to reach for her, to hold on to her for just a little while longer, but instead I watched as she slowly walked to the door. I'm sorry, she whispered, her hand resting on the doorknob. I never wanted this. And with that she was gone, leaving me standing alone in the room, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. After that night, Emily and I avoided each other even more than before. The house, once filled with uncomfortable silences, now felt completely empty. We drifted through our routines like ghosts, barely acknowledging one another. Every interaction, every glance felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. And I didn't know how much longer we could keep going like this. I spent most of my time in my room pretending to look for jobs, but in reality I was just staring blankly at my laptop. My mind consumed by everything that had happened. There was no escaping it. The guilt, the confusion, the desire, they were all tangled together in a way that felt impossible to unravel. One evening, after what felt like days of silence, I heard a knock on my door. My heart jumped. It was Emily. I knew it before I even opened it. When I did, she stood there, looking as tired and worn out as I felt her eyes met mine briefly. But she quickly looked away. Can we talk? She asked softly. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She walked into the room, but neither of us sat down. Instead, we stood there awkwardly a few feet apart, as if even the distance between us was too fragile. I've been thinking a lot about everything. She began, her voice shaky, about what we've done. She paused, taking a deep breath, and I don't know how to fix it. Charlie, I don't think it can be fixed. Her words hit me hard, but I didn't know how to respond. She was right, and deep down, I knew it. There was no fixing this. We had crossed too many lines, gone too far down a path we never should have taken. I don't want to lose you, I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. But I don't know how to stay either. Emily looked at me then, her eyes filled with a sadness that felt like it might swallow us both. We're already lost, Charlie, she said, her voice breaking. We lost ourselves the moment this started. I felt my chest tighten, the reality of her words sinking in. She was right. No matter what we did now, no matter how much we wanted to hold on to whatever this was between us, we were already too far gone. The person I had been before, all of this, the person she had been, was already gone. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. I don't want this to end, but I don't know if we can keep going. She nodded, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. We were standing on the edge of something, but neither of us had the strength to jump, and neither of us could turn back. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. Maybe the only thing left to do is let go. The silence that followed felt like the end of everything. We both stood there, knowing she was right, but unable to move, unable to take that final step away from each other. I hadn't expected her to come. Not now, when everything felt so final. I opened the door, and there she stood, her expression unreadable, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe the same thing I was looking for. Are you leaving? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to say. What could I say? We'd already said everything, hadn't we? But something in her voice made me pause. There was a sadness there, yes, but something else too, something I hadn't expected. She stepped into the room, her gaze never leaving mine. I thought I'd be ready for this, she said softly, but I'm not. Her words hung in the air, heavy with everything we hadn't yet resolved. I could feel my pulse quicken, the familiar tension creeping back into the space between us. Neither am I admitted the truth, spilling out before I could stop it. For a long moment we stood there in silence, both of us trapped in the space between what was and what could have been. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the same conflict I felt inside myself. I thought leaving would give us both peace. But now that the moment was here, I realized it wasn't as simple as I'd thought. I don't know what to do, Charlie, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to keep hurting you, but I don't know how to let you go either. My chest tightened at her words. I took a step toward her, not thinking, just moving. Maybe we don't have to let go, I said, my voice low, uncertain. Maybe there's another way. Her eyes met mine, wide with a mixture of hope and fear. And what way is that, she asked, her voice barely audible, as if she was afraid of the answer. I didn't have an answer, not really. All I knew was that I couldn't keep pretending that leaving would fix anything. But staying didn't feel like the solution either. She reached out then, her hand brushing lightly against my arm. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to make my heart race, enough to pull me back into the confusion and longing that had been suffocating me for weeks. I don't want to keep making mistakes, she whispered, her voice barely holding together. I looked into her eyes, searching for something, anything that could tell me what we were supposed to do next. But all I found was the same confusion, the same pain reflected back at me. I wanted to say something to reassure her, to make it all make sense, but no words came. And then out of nowhere, she stepped back just one step, but it felt like miles. Her hand dropped from my arm, her gaze flickering to the floor. Maybe some things just can't be fixed, she said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the silence of the room. I stood there frozen. As she turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, and with them, the last thread of hope he'd been holding on to unraveled. I didn't chase her. I didn't call her back. I just stood there, letting the silence swallow me whole. And in that silence I was left with one question, the one that would haunt me long after I left that house. Asterisk, had we ever really had a choice, or were we always destined to fall?